Did you know that nursery rhymes have kind of creepy and real backstories, like Ring Around the Roses being about the Great Plague of 1665, and Little Miss Muffet about a child eating spiders outside of her school? Let's talk the creepy truths of innocent and childish stories we tell our children even to this day. This must be one of the most known nursery rhymes, but the popularity of this nursery rhyme sends shivers when you think about the true meaning of the words. In 1665, a plague broke out in England, and this is just being one of the worst plagues since the Black Death. The earliest cases recorded of this bubonic plague started in the spring of 1665, just outside the St Giles in the Fields Cathedral in West London. This plague reached its highs throughout the hot summers months and peaked in September, with 7,165 Londoners dying within 1 week. And what is more acquainting than seeing the fact that this plague was caused again by fleas, just like the Black Death. This was before finding that the rats were carrying the fleas that led to both outbreaks, which the discovery of this was noted in the late 1800s. The rats had been attracted to the city streets, especially those living in the poorest areas, because of the waste that filled the streets, which would have been dreadful to smell, see, and live amongst, because the rise of the sewage didn't happen until 1885. At least we learn one thing: poop smells and could cause you to have rats that have fleas, which leads to the plague. Because we as humans, we are all about learning. Anyway, because of this outburst of the plague, many important people fled the city, like most doctors, lawyers, and merchants, as well as Charles II and his courtiers that left in July for Hampshire and then moved to Oxford. And Parliament was postponed and moved to Oxford in October. Even court cases was moved from Westminster to Oxford. This plague was spreading like fire, and everyone panicked with fleeing the city, quarantining, and if you didn't have the fear of death itself, it was weird. Also, through the panic, people had worried that things like the air being impure was the cause of this plague, and thus would try and clean it using smoke and heat, which I can only imagine what that means. Like setting your house on fire. Now let's go into what the actual nursery rhyme itself has anything to do with the plague. There are 3 types of plague, and this was called a bubonic plague. You'll understand the reasoning that this is relevant soon. The bubonic plague created swellings called buboes in the lymph nodes around the armpits, groin, and neck. Other symptoms consist of headache, vomiting, and fevers. The victims of the plague had about 30% of a chance of dying in the first 2 weeks of contracting the plague, and is spread from being bit by a flea with, let me just try and say this, Yersinia pestis bacteria, carried by something of the black rat. So relating this to the child's nursery rhyme, Ring Around the Roses, a lot of people believe that this old yet popular nursery rhyme refers to the symptoms of the Great Plague in 1665, with rings around the roses being a symbolic metaphor for the boils that people used to get and the small rash that would barrier these boils. The pocket full of posers refers to the flowers used to try and mask the smell of the people that would get this plague, because it would literally smell like rotting flesh. To do so, they would carry a posy, which means a small bunch of assorted flowers that can be pinned to a jacket. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down refers to the cremation and the death that the plague victims experienced. In the New Ages, this nursery rhyme changed from being a symbolic song for the plague to the 19th century meaning of love, with the dance to go along with it, where the children would skip while linked together in a circle around the person in the middle to represent that they are loved by the people around them. It is crazy to think how the difference is and how quick something can change its meaning. Now I ask, when you listen to this nursery rhyme again, are you thinking you're loved? Or do you see the shivery tale of the 1665 plague breakout? There is two Humpty Dumpty versions of the well-known lyrics. One being that you've just heard, and the second being the eldest version with the change in the last few lines, where it changes to fourscore men and fourscore more could not put Humpty Dumpty where he was before. This version links with the first theory of what Humpty Dumpty means, considering the few theories of what the nursery rhyme means, and the first being that Humpty Dumpty symbolises a cannon during the English Civil War. The cannon was owned by a one-eyed gunner named Thompson, who had named his cannon Humpty Dumpty. It is said that the gunner had placed the cannon on the wall of St Mary at the Walls Church in Gloucestershire. During the Civil War, the cannon had been attacked, dislodging it from the wall, and it had fallen. Because of the heavy equipment and the danger to put the cannon back, no one was able to place the cannon back to its rightful place on the wall. However, there is one more theory, which is a bit more interesting to historians, kind of. Others believe that the lyrics do mean, however, short people, and the nursery rhyme is just taking the mick out of people. However, the interesting theory is that of King Richard III. During the Battle of Bosworth Field took place. Early in August 1485, Henry Tudor and would-be King of Lancastrian sailed across from France to South Wales with an army of around 2,000 men. Throughout Wales, the army had grown to double its size, where then they reached the Shrewsbury border. With King Richard III hearing of this news, he himself brought an army. The gathering of his army within Leicestershire and managed to gain around 10,000 men. The king deployed his army to the top of the hill on the south market of Bosworth in Leicestershire. This was where they had met Henry Tudor's army. The army was standing at opposite ends of the hills, when at this point Henry's stepfather, Thomas, and his troops helped the 2,000 plus army and had now grown the army to stand at around 6,000 men. This was when the battle had begun, and Lord Stanley, Henry's stepfather, simply was just observing from afar. During the battle, King Richard III had the idea to separate his troops to directly attack Henry. However, Lord Stanley had seen ways of which Richard was heading already and decided to join the fight. When King Richard had been separated from his army, his horse had become stuck in the bog of war and would have to continue on foot, where he would see his demise while fighting. Richard was the last Plantagenet King of England and the last English monarch to be killed in battle. When the army troops saw the death of King Richard, the troops fled the battle, and the crown was brought to Henry, who was proclaimed king on Crown Hill. Richard's body was left in an unmarked tomb at Gracefire in Leicestershire, and forgotten until it was discovered by archaeologists in September of 2012. In the references to Humpty Dumpty, it is said that Richard had a hunchback, and in the theory, Humpty Dumpty is King Richard III. Sat on a wall is representing the reign and the fight to his power. Had a great fall represents the loss of power and his death. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again refers to the failure of the army after they had to flee the battle and losing the battle of Bosworth.
Silver bells and cockle shells and pretty maids all in a row, and pretty maids all in a row.
You would have heard me talk about the Queen of Scots in the last episode, so let me talk the full details of who she is and why she's such an iconic person in history. The well-known Mary, Mary, quite contrary nursery rhyme has meaning in both historically and religious settings. Religiously, this nursery rhyme is referred to the mother of Jesus, and the reason for the song is to spread Catholicism. However, the deep and dark version is that this includes Mary, the Queen of Scots. Mary Stuart became the Queen of Scots at a young age of 6 and stayed in this position from 1542 until 1667. After 19 years as a prisoner of her cousin Elizabeth I, when Mary was executed on the 8th of February in 1587. Mary had been born to be the Queen of Scots, and her cousin focused to overcome Mary and become Queen herself, which, as I've just said, this would be the burning desire that brought Mary to execution. Mary in her early years was used as a pawn to marriage, since back then Scotland was the poorer nation. Mary was pawned in marriage, first to England and then more successfully to France. During all of this, the era of Renaissance and Reformation was happening, and she was one of the biggest, more powerful driven women, along with Catherine de Medici, Mary Tudor, and Elizabeth I. On the 10th of February 1567, an explosion destroyed the lodgings at Kirkhoe Field, where Darnley, Mary's husband, and King Corset was staying. Darnley was found dead in the rubble of the explosion, and the Queen of Scots had been implicated in the murder. The prime suspect of the murder was James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell. And this guy was to become Mary's third husband. They had fled Edinburgh, however, Bothwell was tried for murder and was set free. But the suspicions of Mary would lead to her following being lost, and eventually the loss of her crown in 1568. Remembering that Mary had fled Edinburgh, she had become captive by enemies in 1567, where she was held prisoner until she was implicated in the Babington plot against Elizabeth I in 1586. And in 1587, she was convicted of treason and executed. Mary, quite contrary, is something to describe Mary, the Queen of Scots, which means that they go the opposite to the influential trends. How does your garden grow refers to the loss of lineage after her accused involvement in the death of Darnley. She had also been one of the most beautiful women in the kingdom at the time, so it is said that she wore silver bells and cockle shells as fashion, as a statement. However, Mary had also been known to be unfaithful, and a cockle was used to describe a husband that had been cheated on by his wife. And pretty maids in a row refer to her 4 handmaids that followed her to and from France and would have helped in the execution of Darnley. Ironically, they were all called Mary and was nicknamed the 4 Marys. So, what do you think? Is this to show the spreading of religious beliefs, or is this a twisted tale of Mary being unfaithful and killing her husband?
Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells and pretty maids all in a row, and pretty maids all in a row. Here we go round the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush. Here we go round the mulberry bush on a cold and frosty morning. This is the way we wash our face, we wash our face, we wash our face. This is the way we wash our face on a cold and frosty morning.
This little rhyme hasn't got a deep and seated meaning. The fact that this song was sung by Victorian female prisoners with their daughters around a mulberry bush tree that had grown in a prison yard of Wakefield is disturbing to think about, especially when you get down to the nitty-gritty of what the West Yorkshire prison looked like and how the prisoners were treated back in those days. The Victorian prison system was created by men for men. The thought that women were going to be accommodated in this prison was an afterthought. For women, it had been believed that they needed to be saved twice, especially throughout their sentencing. Firstly, they were convicted of their criminal ways and saved because of their criminal ways. And then the second was from their deviance from social normality, because women was always accused of being oh so innocent. In this case, the prison of the 1800s subjected women to different stages of discipline. The first being locked in separate confinements for 4 months, then moved to associated labour, which included things like cooking, making clothes, and construction, and then being transferred to a female-only institute. This is where the song of Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush, I can imagine, comes into play. It is rumoured that 90% of women were unable to read or write, thus causing them to create rhymes and songs to help them and their children to remember how to do everyday tasks. If you research the whole song of Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush, it has lyrics like this is the way we wash our face, this is the way we brush our teeth, and this is the way we comb our hair. This was a technique that prison mothers would use to help their children understand how to routinely get ready for the morning. In doing so, they would include the mulberry bush located in the Wakefield prison yard. Sadly, however, this tree has died in 2017 because of a beetle infestation. Wakefield prison wasn't supposed to be meant for prisoners, in fact. This building was to place people as a hold before they was convicted and trialled. The thing is that this holding place was more like a modern day prison if I've ever seen one. The people would be shackled with leg irons at all times of the day and were living amongst filthy environments they also had to pay for with a jailer's fee. Leg irons are like handcuffs, just for your feet, just to, let people know. The prison system back then was also always up to a different monarch of the kingdom. For example, Wakefield would be ruled over the owner of Wakefield's castle, which would have been owned by the crown, or also known by George III in the early 1800s, and then George IV after his father took ill and died in 1820s. So this prison system would have had many rules that people would have had to follow that would have looked different for any other prison. A good understanding of the prison system was that workers from the prison were often not paid for their labour, but would make money by selling prisoners' work and receiving a release fee after the inmates were free. Looking back on Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush, you can see the intense learning that mothers would have to go through for their daughters, and the dedication that mothers of the prison system would have gone through also to try and help their children learn so that they wouldn't end up in the exact same place as what their mothers would.
Here we go round the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush. Here we go round the mulberry bush on a cold and frosty morning. This is the way we wash our face, we wash our face, we wash our face. This is the way we wash our face in a cold and frosty morning. Rock-a-bye baby on the treetops, where the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the boat breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come baby, cradle and all.
Rock-a-bye Baby is also known to some as Bee-Bo, Babby-Lo. On the treetops, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the wind ceases, the cradle will fall. Fall down comes the baby and cradle and all. The translation of Bibo Babalo is said to be a corrupted French nurse's threat in a fable and translates to hush, there's a wolf. This is an attempt to shush a crying baby. This would be a threat to the child that wouldn't hush, that she would feed the child to a hungry wolf waiting outside. When the child hushes, she'd sing the child's praises, saying that if the hungry wolf was to ever hurt a child, she would beat the wolf to death. And the moral of the story is that the wolf should never trust someone that says one thing and yet means the other. J.D. La Fontaine collected loads of different fables and adapted them into French free verses, which is a poetic type of style of writing similar to the nursery rhyme Rockabye Baby. He would issue titles like Rockabye Baby's verse in one of his volumes between 1668 and 1694. However, there is multiple different reasons behind this lullaby. It is rumoured by Gerald Massey that this lullaby is of religious descent, with the baby in the cradle representing Jesus. However, very little proof is shown in this religious meaning. It is seen in Massey's work that Jesus has parallels to Horus, the Egyptian deity or god. Because of the parallels Massey's made, he suggests that the baby is actually Horus, and the tree that the baby is hanging on is a sycamore tree, which symbolises the tree of life in Egyptian mythology. And the falling with the rhyme symbolises Jesus's or Horus's resurrection after death. Personally, to me, the most interesting theory is the 17th century Native American symbolization of motherhood. Mothers in the 17th century, Native Americans would hang their babies from trees in a cradle to protect them from bugs and dangerous animals so they could sleep peacefully, knowing they were safe from any ground animal attacks. Not only this, but it is also said that this would help the children sleep because of the gentle breeze that would rock the baby to sleep, and this theory of the rhyme states that the English remade this song after the Native Americans sent drawings and written stories between the two countries of America and England. Another theory of the rhyme's origin is that of the 17th century pirates, of which the song would be sang to newbies on board of their ships, especially to those who worked in the crow's nest of the ship, which is the platform that is located at the top of the sailing blankets, that helps the shift movements and helps the ship's directions. Especially on windy and dangerous nights, out at sea, the crow's nest would be a place to get brutal forces of wind, as though they are rocking a baby to sleep. Another theory is that of James II not having an heir to his throne and losing control of his forced beliefs in England. This is until he cheated on his wife, and the girl he cheated on with gave him a son, of which there was many speculation if the child was legitimately his or not, which gave others the chance to run with the theory that he stole the child. This theory is said that the Rockabye Baby rhythm is one of the commoners he ruled to share their opinions, and these opinions turned quite vicious, by the theory saying that these people would say it as a way to show that the people wanted the heir to the throne to die. And the Rockabye Baby on a treetop too relates to the child being placed in a high place. Down came the cradle, baby and all, also refers to the wishing of the child's death, and in turn the death of James II's beliefs.
Rockabye tops. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the boat breaks, the cradle will fall. And I will come, baby, cradle and all. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after.
The first interpretation of this rhyme is that of King Louis XVI. The 16th! I never knew Louis was such a popular name in the 1700s. It also is of the interpretation of his wife, Mary Antoinette. In 1793, it is said that this story is about the execution of the King and Queen of France. Mary's popularity comes in more so of the phrase, "let them eat cake," when the starving peasants of France explained their severe conditions of their living finances. At this point, the peasants of France could barely afford bread, and cake was known to be only for the rich, which helps to understand how out of touch the king and queen really was with their people. However, the story of the king and queen during the Revolution of France is the reason for this theory. During the French Revolution of 1790, the king was less than supportive during the hard times French people exhibited. He a few times showed dishonesty and even once tried to flee the country during the revolution, only leaving behind a detailed manifesto that rejected the revolution and uttered the idea of a constitutional monarchy instead. He didn't get very far after he was spotted and taken unwillingly back to France, which is also known as the flight to Varennes. I hope I'm saying that right. As well as just before all of this, it was found that the Queen was corresponding with her family back home in Austria and raised the possibilities of an armed intervention. This caused the King and Queen to be under house arrest. The year later, war had broken out, and Austria and Prussia was declared allianced with France. However, Louis was then pushed to declare war on Austria and stormed the nearby Austrian Netherlands, but wasn't successful. During his long-awaited downfall, a Prussian declaration was extended to his enemies, inviting them to the country, and in August of 1792, a mob stormed Tuileries Palace in Paris. I think that's how you say it, and was forced under shelter of the mob. Days later, the King and Queen was imprisoned and stripped of his title. It wasn't until a chest was found in the palace that was stormed that people would have found incriminating evidence of the former king corresponding with the enemy. It wasn't until this discovery that Jacobine, on the left side of the revolution, called for the king and queen's head. It is said that Jack and Jill went up the hill refers to the king and queen of France during the French Revolution. And the part where it says Jack fell down and broke his crown and Jill came tumbling after was the representation of them both being decapitated. The second interpretation of this is also of alcohol. In a different theory, it states that it comes from the tax increase on alcohol during the 17th century. King Charles I in England had wanted to place tax on alcohol, and it is said that the first writings of this rhyme was Jack and Gill, which was another term for a quarter pint, while Jack was a shot of the equivalent measurement of a double Jaeger bomb. However, the Parliament didn't want to do this. So, to rejoice the news, people had made the term Jack had broke his crown and Jill came tumbling after, the third being that of the Norse mythos. In Norse mythology, it is said that the moon had kidnapped 2 children while they were fetching water from a well. In doing so, the 2 children being out after dark was kidnapped by the moon, also known as a mani in the Norse mythos. This tale of the 2 children would be told to others in an attempt to stop children from going out past dark. The rhyme is said to have changed from the names of the 2 children being Hajuki to Jack, and from Bill to Jill. The 4th is of that of a star-crossed lover type of story. In a small town of Somerset called Killiston, there is a hill named after Jack and Jill. And the theory is that the nursery rhyme comes from a young couple that pondered the hill after becoming pregnant. It is said that in the story that Jack had tried to fetch water as his girlfriend started labour on the hill, and in doing so fell, and whilst in the nicest way possible, broke his crown. His crown being the highest point of the skull, also known as the vertex. Brutally, he died from a head injury. And whilst this was happening to Jack, Jill had started labour and would die through the immense pain of labour out in the night. A cute little fact, however, is with the hill being marked with 6 rocks, and on the rocks is engraved with each verse of the nursery rhyme.
Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. 3 blind mice, 3 blind mice, see how they run, see how they run. They all ran after the farmer's wife, who cut off their tails with a carving knife. Did you ever see such a thing in your life as 3 blind mice?
Now this one also includes some of the theory that I missed through the talk of Mary Mary Quite Contrary, and involves the rumour that Bloody Mary is Queen Mary I. Queen Mary I is a busy person and more popular in these stories than I've let on. Mary I of England was Henry VIII's daughter, and Henry VIII was, well, a prick. I can't use a different term for that, I'm sorry. Anyways, the first wife of Henry was divorced, and after the divorce, Mary managed to become queen. In doing so, Mary had set her mind on making sure that anyone that would follow Catholicism, which I have now only just realised I've been saying that wrong all the way through this podcast, and if you had been found to follow Catholicism, she would imprison them and torture them as a way to get back at her father for treating her mother so cruelly. This is where the other rhyme comes in, because it is said that Mary, being contrary, and Henry ruling on the behalf of his beliefs, she would torture those who would follow the same beliefs as her father, where "How does your garden grow?" with cockle shells and silver bells is a symbolic meaning of the torture devices she would use on the Catholic followers. How does your garden grow, however, represents the huge mass of people that she would mistreat for following the Catholic Church. The 3 blind mice follows on from this. In the 3 blind mice rhyme, it is said that during the ruling of Mary I, Queen of England, she gained the attention of 3 Protestant bishops, Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, and Thomas Cranmer. The 3 bishops planned a plot against the Queen, and in doing so, in 1555, Queen Mary announced the execution of the 3 bishops. And this is where the tale of the 3 blind mice started. The 3 bishops were executed, and the rhyme was rumoured around the kingdom to tell the tale of the horror you will face if you plot against who is now known as Bloody Mary. The three blind mice in this story represents the three bishops, and seeing how they run represents their plot against the queen. The farmer's wife represents the queen, and the queen killing the bishops eerily resembles the mice getting their tails chopped off as the bishops were burnt at the stake.
Three blind mice, see how they run, see how they run. They all ran after the farmer's wife, who cut off their tails with a carving knife. Did you ever see such a thing in your life as three blind mice? Little Miss Muffet, who sat on a tuffet, eating her curds away. Along came a spider, who sat down beside her and frightened Miss Muffet away.
Little Miss Muffet is a sad and enraging tale of a neglectful parent. It is rumoured that Little Miss Muffet was a real girl, named Patience Muffet, and her father, Dr. Thomas Muffet, was a physicist. I can't say that word apparently, and also took a keen interest in bugs of all kinds. Either way you think of the story, it is neglectful. The first being of a tale of Miss Muffet sat alone in a field with no parental guidance, and thus eating curds of whey, which is also spoiled milk. Curdled milk being lumps of grossness that happens when milk spoils, and whey being the separated water from the milk that had curdled. While she was sat on the grass verge, which, by the way, is also called a tuffet in the 17th centuries, she found a spider that had frightened her and she ran away, but with no supervision. The question remains, where did she go if her father wouldn't listen to her fears? Which brings me to the second sense of the meaning behind this tale. The second tale is that Dr. Thomas Muffet admired spiders that much that he would let them loose in the house, and she would have bugs crawling all over her and the house during the night while Miss Muffet was sleeping. When the next morning she awoke, eating her breakfast, the curds of whey, she would be frightened of the fact that they were in her food and crawling all over the table she was eating, and would eventually run out of the house in fear. The third, and more so creepy and crawly version, is that in 1553, while Dr. Thomas Muffet lived in Brooksman's Park until 1604, Miss Muffet's dad became obsessed with the bugs. He started to believe that they would cure the common cold. In doing so, he would run tests on his daughter during flu seasons, and would do things like pouring spiders over her in the morning to make sure she would not feel bad. When she got even the slightest bit of a tickle in her throat, he would move on to the other extremes. When one day she was getting sick, and her dad decided to feed her spiders to try and help the flu symptoms. It is said that in some of the research of these stories that she even was seen outside of her house eating spiders mushed into other foods. Being afraid of spiders, it is said to show how neglectful her father was when doing this to her daughter. Realistically, however, not much has been found to be true surrounding Miss Muffet, as there is no real record that Patience, which is Miss Muffet's supposedly real name, even existed. So, a question does still remain. Is this just something hidden from the record to hide the neglect a father gave his daughter after she would die from, I don't know, probably eating spiders or curds of whey, or maybe even running away after her father did just not understand her fear of the creature.
Little Miss Muffet, who's out on a tuffet, eating her curds away. Along came a spider, who sat down beside her and frightened Miss Muffet away.
Thank you guys for enjoying and watching all the way through this episode, and I really hope you do enjoy the creepy and weird ways of which nursery rhymes are told in such a way to children compared to their realistic and quite brutal and cruel ways they are actually made. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please like, subscribe, comment, all of the usual stuff that you do on YouTube, and I hope you have a nice night.